Block 1. The rain pounded against the windshield as I clutched the steering wheel, my knuckles white with tension. Each flash of lightning illuminated my sleeping 6-month-old son in the rearview mirror, his tiny chest rising and falling in peaceful ignorance of our desperate situation. The wipers struggled against the downpour, matching the frantic rhythm of my heartbeat. 2 days on the road, and exhaustion clawed at the edges of my consciousness. "Just a little further, Noah," I whispered, though my words were drowned by the storm. "Just a little further, and we'll be safe." Safe. The word felt foreign on my tongue. I hadn't felt safe since the day I discovered who Noah's father really was. What he really was. I pulled into the parking lot of a roadside motel, the kind where questions aren't asked and cash is preferred. The neon vacancy sign flickered weakly through the rain, casting an eerie red glow across my son's sleeping face. For a moment I sat motionless, listening to the rain and fighting the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on my chest. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my purse and the baby carrier. "Come on, sweetie," I murmured, carefully unbuckling Noah and transferring him to the carrier, shielding his face from the rain with my jacket. He stirred but didn't wake as I hurried across the parking lot, puddles splashing against my worn sneakers. The motel lobby smelled of cigarettes and lemon-scented cleaner. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes barely looked up from her magazine as I approached the counter. "Room for the night," I said, my voice hoarse from hours of disuse. "Just me and my baby." She slid a registration card across the counter. $55 cash. Checkout's at 11. I filled out the form with a false name, Melissa Green, and paid with crumpled bills from my dwindling cash supply. No credit cards, no paper trail. That's what my friend Sarah had told me before I left. Sarah, who'd helped me escape in the first place. I prayed she was safe. "Room 119, end of the hall," the woman said, sliding a key attached to a plastic number tag across the counter. "There's a vending machine by the ice maker if you need anything." I nodded my thanks and made my way down the dimly lit hallway, the carpet worn thin beneath my feet. Room 119 smelled of stale air and cheap detergent, but it was clean enough. I set Noah's carrier on the bed and quickly checked the locks on the door and windows before allowing my shoulders to slump with temporary relief. As I unpacked our meager belongings, diapers, formula, a change of clothes for each of us, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. Dark circles shadowed my once bright blue eyes, and my blonde hair hung limp and unwashed. I looked haunted. Hunted. Because I was. 3 weeks ago, my life had been almost perfect. I had a beautiful baby boy, a nice apartment in Boston, and a job as a nurse at Massachusetts General that I could return to after maternity leave. Sure, Noah's father wasn't in the picture, but that was by choice. My choice. Or so I thought. I'd met Antonio Russo at the hospital when he came in with a business associate who had suffered a workplace accident, a gunshot wound. Antonio had been charming, attentive, and persistent. After weeks of coffee dates and dinners, I'd fallen for his intensity, his protectiveness. When I found out I was pregnant, he'd disappeared, and I'd decided to raise the baby alone. Until 3 weeks ago, when he reappeared at my door. "You have my son," he'd said. No greeting, no explanation for his absence. His dark eyes had moved from my face to the baby in my arms, and something possessive had flashed in his expression. "You left," I'd responded, instinctively stepping back, clutching Noah closer to my chest. Business required my attention. He'd stepped forward, filling my doorway with his imposing presence. The expensive suit, the gold watch, the subtle scent of his cologne, all of it screamed power and money. I wasn't aware of the child until recently. His name is Noah. A strong name. Antonio had reached out, his fingers brushing against Noah's cheek. "He has my eyes," and he did. Noah had inherited his father's deep brown eyes, so dark they were almost black. "What do you want, Antonio?" I'd asked, though part of me already knew. The way he looked at Noah, like he was claiming him, cataloging his features for familiar traces of himself. "I want what's mine, Emma." His eyes had hardened then, all pretense of charm vanishing. "You and the boy. You're coming with me. I don't belong to you." The words had come out stronger than I felt. His laugh had been soft, dangerous. Everything in this city belongs to me, Emma, including you and my son. The sooner you accept that, the easier things will be. That night, after he'd left with a promise to return the next day, I'd received a call from Sarah, a fellow nurse and the only person who knew about Antonio. Emma, you need to run, she'd whispered urgently. Antonio Russo isn't just some businessman. He's the head of the Russo crime family. They control half the city. Drugs, gambling, extortion. They're into everything. The man I've been seeing works for the DA's office. He says they've been trying to build a case against the Russos for years, but witnesses keep disappearing. My blood had turned to ice. What are you saying, Sarah? I'm saying the father of your child is one of the most dangerous men in Boston. And if he's decided he wants you and Noah, he won't stop until he has you. I'd packed a bag that night, withdrawn as much cash as I could from my savings, and left before dawn with Noah. Now, 3 weeks later, I was still running. Noah began to fuss in his carrier, pulling me back to our dismal motel room. I lifted him out, inhaling his sweet baby scent as I cradled him against my chest. It's okay, baby boy, I soothed. Mommy's here. Mommy's got you. I prepared a bottle and settled onto the bed with him, the television murmuring in the background for some semblance of normalcy. Noah's tiny hand wrapped around my finger as he drank, his eyes, Antonio's eyes, gazing up at me with complete trust. I won't let him take you, I whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I won't let him turn you into what he is. After Noah fell asleep, I placed him in the middle of the bed, surrounding him with pillows to prevent him from rolling off. I took a quick shower, the hot water doing little to ease the tension in my shoulders. Tomorrow we would head further west, maybe change directions and go south. Keep moving, keep running. I was drying my hair with a thin motel towel when my phone rang, the prepaid one I'd bought 2 towns back. The one no one should have the number for. My heart stuttered in my chest as I stared at the unknown caller ID. Against my better judgment, I answered, but said nothing. Emma. His voice, smooth as aged whiskey and just as intoxicating, sent shivers down my spine. You've been very difficult to find. My eyes darted to Noah, still sleeping peacefully on the bed. How did you get this number? You should know by now that there's very little beyond my reach. Antonio's tone was conversational, as if we were discussing dinner plans instead of my desperate attempt to escape him. I must admit, I'm impressed by your resourcefulness. Most people wouldn't have made it this far. What do you want? I've already told you what I want, Emma. You and the child are mine. We're not possessions, Antonio. Aren't you? There was a dark amusement in his voice. Everything has a price, Emma. Everything can be owned. The sooner you accept that, the easier things will be for all of us. Leave us alone, I pleaded, hating the tremor in my voice. Please. Noah deserves better than his father? His voice hardened. Better than a life of privilege and protection? Better than power? Better than a criminal. Silence stretched between us, and for a moment I thought he'd hung up. Look out your window, Emma. My blood turned to ice. What? Look out your window. With shaking legs, I moved to the window and carefully pulled back the curtain. In the still pouring rain, a black SUV with tinted windows idled in the parking lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. How? Did you really think you could hide from me? The question was soft, almost gentle. You're exactly 247 miles from Boston, staying in a rundown motel under the name Melissa Green. You're wearing those faded jeans you like so much, and that gray sweatshirt you bought at a gas station 2 days ago. Noah is sleeping. He had formula 30 minutes ago, and will probably wake for another feeding around 2 a.m. Tears blurred my vision as the full impact of his words hit me. He'd been tracking us the whole time. You have 2 options, Emma, Antonio continued. You can come out to the car willingly, or my men can come in and get you. Either way, you and Noah will be coming with me. And if I call the police? His laugh was cold. The local sheriff owes me a favor. Who do you think told me which room you were in? Defeat crashed over me like a wave, threatening to pull me under. I looked at Noah, so innocent, so vulnerable. What kind of life could I give him on the run? Always looking over our shoulders, never staying in one place long enough to build a home. And Antonio would never stop hunting us. I'll give you 5 minutes to gather your things, he said. Don't make me come in after you, Emma. You won't like the consequences." The line went dead. I stood frozen by the window, watching as the driver's door of the SUV opened and a tall figure stepped out, opening an umbrella before moving to the rear passenger door. Even from this distance, I recognized the commanding posture, the confident stride. Antonio had found us. With trembling hands, I gathered our belongings, tears streaming down my face as I packed Noah's things. When I lifted him, he stirred but didn't wake, nestling against my shoulder with complete trust. "I'm so sorry, baby boy," I whispered, clutching him close. "I tried. God knows I tried." As I stepped out into the rain, the SUV's rear door opened. Antonio stood there, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit despite the late hour, his dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my knees weak. Behind him, I could make out the silhouette of another man, a bodyguard, no doubt. "Emma," Antonio said, my name a caress on his lips. "It's time to come home." I tightened my grip on Noah as Antonio's eyes moved to our son's sleeping face, a possessive hunger in his gaze that terrified me more than any threat could. "You and the child are mine," he repeated, extending his hand toward me, "and I protect what's mine." With nowhere left to run, I took his hand. The SUV's interior smelled of expensive leather and Antonio's cologne, sandalwood with hints of amber and spice. Noah remained asleep in my arms as we pulled away from the motel, the rhythmic sweep of windshield wipers punctuating the silence. I kept my eyes fixed on my son's peaceful face, refusing to look at the man beside me. "You've lost weight," Antonio observed, his voice deceptively gentle. From the corner of my eye, I saw him gesture to the driver. "Carlo, stop at the next decent restaurant that's open." "That's not necessary," I said, finally meeting his gaze. "I'm not hungry." Antonio's dark eyes studied me with unsettling intensity. "It wasn't a question, Emma." The quiet authority in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This was the real Antonio Russo. Not the charming man who'd pursued me with flattery and attention, but the Mafia boss accustomed to absolute obedience. "Where are you taking us?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Home." "Boston isn't my home anymore." A faint smile curved his lips. "Who said anything about Boston?" Fear gripped my chest. I instinctively held Noah tighter, causing him to stir against me. "My job is in Boston. My apartment—" "Your apartment has been emptied. Your resignation from the hospital was submitted 2 weeks ago. As far as anyone knows, you've moved away for family reasons." Antonio reached over to adjust the blanket around Noah, his fingers brushing mine. "You should be thanking me, Emma. I've been very understanding about this little adventure of yours." "Understanding?" Anger momentarily overwhelmed my fear. "You hunted us down like animals. I protected what's mine." His voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. "You took my son and ran. Did you really think I would allow that? He's my son too." "Yes." Antonio nodded. "Which is why you're sitting here instead of in the trunk." The casual threat silenced me. I turned away, watching raindrops race down the window as we pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner. The neon open sign cast a blue glow across the wet pavement. "Wait here," Antonio ordered the driver before turning to me. "Bring Noah. He's sleeping. Bring him." The finality in his tone left no room for argument. I gathered Noah, who fussed briefly before settling against my shoulder, and followed Antonio into the diner. Despite the late hour, a few truckers occupied booths, nursing coffee and picking at plates of food. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, did a double-take when Antonio entered, her gaze lingering on his tailored suit and confident stride. "Booth in the back," he instructed her, his hand resting on the small of my back, guiding me forward. The booth was positioned with a clear view of both the entrance and the kitchen. I noticed. No coincidence. Antonio ushered me into the seat facing the wall, while he took the one with the view of the restaurant. A tactical decision. Always in control. "Coffee for both of us," he told the waitress when she approached. "And whatever you have that's freshly made and substantial." "The meatloaf just came out," she offered, her eyes darting curiously between us and Noah. "That will be fine. 2 plates." When she left, I shifted Noah to my other shoulder, wincing at the ache in my arms. Without a word, Antonio reached across the table. "Give him to me." I hesitated, instinctively pulling back. "Emma," he said, his voice low with warning. "Give me my son." The threat in his tone made me comply. I carefully transferred Noah to his waiting arms, my heart constricting as Antonio cradled him with unexpected gentleness. Noah's eyes fluttered open, revealing those deep brown irises, so like his father's, before closing again, apparently content in this stranger's embrace. "He doesn't know you," I said, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. "He will." Antonio studied Noah's face with possessive fascination. "He has my mother's chin, my eyes." His gaze lifted to mine. "Your nose." I looked away, unwilling to share this moment of parental pride with him. "Where are you taking us?" "I have a property upstate. Remote. Secure." He adjusted Noah's blanket with surprising dexterity. "You'll both be comfortable there while arrangements are made." "Arrangements for what?" The waitress returned with our coffee, preventing his answer. I wrapped my hands around the mug, savoring its warmth. When she left, Antonio continued as if there had been no interruption. "For our life together, of course." He said it as if it were the most natural conclusion. Noah needs both his parents. "I don't want this life," I whispered, tears threatening. "I don't want Noah growing up surrounded by what you do." "And what is it that I do, Emma?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Run successful businesses? Provide for my family? Protect what's mine? You hurt people, only those who deserve it." He sipped his coffee, one arm still securely holding Noah. "The world isn't the safe, orderly place they taught you about in nursing school, Emma. It's brutal, unforgiving. The strong survive by making their own rules. Is that what you want to teach our son? That violence is the answer? I want to teach him to be strong, to take what he wants, to protect what's his." Antonio's eyes softened as he gazed down at Noah. "I want to give him everything I never had." The waitress returned with our food, thick slices of meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans. My stomach growled traitorously at the sight. "Eat," Antonio ordered, shifting Noah to one arm so he could cut his own food with the other. The domestic normality of the scene was jarring against the reality of our situation. I ate mechanically, the food tasteless despite my hunger. Halfway through the meal, Noah began to fuss, his little face scrunching as he worked up to a full cry. "He's hungry," I said, reaching for him. "I need to make a bottle." Antonio handed him back, watching intently as I retrieved a bottle and formula from the diaper bag. The waitress brought hot water without being asked, her eyes curious but kind. "Beautiful baby," she commented. "He has his daddy's eyes." Antonio smiled, a genuine one this time. "Yes, he does." I mixed the formula with practiced efficiency, testing the temperature on my wrist before offering the bottle to Noah. He latched on eagerly, his tiny hand resting against mine as he drank. "You're good with him," Antonio observed. "I'm his mother." "Yes, you are." His expression turned contemplative. "That's why I'm giving you this chance, Emma. Don't mistake my leniency for weakness." The threat hung in the air between us. I focused on Noah, on the rhythmic sound of his feeding, trying to block out the implications of Antonio's words. When we finished eating, Antonio paid with cash, leaving a tip that made the waitress's eyes widen. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. The SUV was waiting, engine running, Carlos standing beside the open rear door. "Boss," he nodded, his eyes scanning the parking lot with practiced vigilance. We returned to the vehicle in silence, Noah now awake but quiet, his curious eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. As we pulled back onto the highway, exhaustion crashed over me. I fought to keep my eyes open, terrified of what might happen if I surrendered to sleep. "Rest," Antonio said, noticing my struggle. "We have several hours of driving ahead." "I'm fine." He sighed, the sound surprisingly human. "Your stubbornness was charming when we met. Now it's becoming tiresome. Sleep, Emma." If I wanted to harm you or take Noah from you, I would have done so already. Logic told me he was right, but fear kept me vigilant. Still, my body betrayed me. The rhythmic motion of the car, the soft hum of tires on wet asphalt, and the warm weight of Noah against my chest conspired to pull me toward unconsciousness. My last conscious thought was that I had failed to escape, failed to protect Noah from his father's world, failed to save us both. I woke to stillness and the absence of Noah's weight in my arms. Panic jolted me upright, heart hammering against my ribs. We were parked in front of a sprawling, rustic mansion, its windows glowing with warm light despite the pre-dawn hour. Pine trees surrounded the property, their silhouettes black against the navy blue sky. "Where's Noah?" I demanded, turning to find Antonio watching me, my son cradled safely in his arms. "He's right here," Antonio said calmly. "He woke when we arrived. I didn't want to disturb you." I reached for Noah, relief washing through me as Antonio transferred him back to my arms. Noah gurgled, seemingly content despite the strange surroundings and unfamiliar arms that had held him. "Where are we?" I asked, peering through the window at the imposing structure before us. "The Adirondacks. My family has owned this property for generations." Antonio opened his door. "Come. It's been a long night." The air was crisp and pine-scented when I stepped out, so different from Boston's city streets or the exhaust-filled highway we'd traveled. Stars glittered overhead, more than I'd ever seen, their light dimming as the eastern horizon began to lighten with approaching dawn. The front door opened before we reached it, revealing a middle-aged woman in a simple black dress, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Mr. Russo," she greeted Antonio with a slight nod. "Everything is prepared as you requested." "Thank you, Mrs. Vasquez." Antonio guided me forward with a hand at the small of my back. "This is Emma and my son Noah. They will be staying with us indefinitely." The woman's dark eyes assessed me without judgment. "The nursery is ready, and I've prepared the blue suite for Ms. Pierce," I supplied when she paused. "Ms. Pierce." She nodded again. "If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your rooms." The interior of the house matched its imposing exterior. High ceilings, hardwood floors, a blend of rustic charm and understated luxury. A massive stone fireplace dominated the great room we passed through, embers still glowing in its depths. "Mrs. Vasquez has been with my family since I was a child," Antonio explained as we climbed a grand staircase. "She's discreet and efficient. She'll see to your needs while you're here." "And how long will that be?" I asked, shifting Noah in my arms. Antonio didn't answer, his attention focused on Mrs. Vasquez as she opened a door at the end of a long hallway. "The nursery," she announced, stepping aside to let us enter. My breath caught. The room was beautiful, painted a soft blue with hand-painted clouds drifting across the ceiling. A mahogany crib dominated the center, its bedding pristine white with delicate blue embroidery. A matching changing table stood against one wall, fully stocked with diapers and supplies. A rocking chair by the window overlooked the forested grounds. Everything was perfect, as if designed specifically for Noah. "When did you—" I couldn't finish the question, overwhelmed by the implications. "I began preparations the day I learned of my son's existence," Antonio said, watching my reaction with those penetrating dark eyes. "Before your impulsive departure." The reminder of our situation, that this wasn't a homecoming but a capture, tempered my appreciation of the beautiful room. Noah, oblivious to the tension, yawned widely in my arms. "He's tired," I murmured, moving to the changing table to prepare him for sleep. The familiarity of the routine, changing his diaper, slipping him into fresh clothes, provided a momentary comfort in this strange new reality. Antonio watched every movement, his expression unreadable. When I placed Noah in the crib, he stepped closer, his shoulder brushing mine as we both gazed down at our son. "He's perfect," Antonio said softly, reaching down to stroke Noah's cheek with one finger. "Perfect in mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. "Not ours, mine." "Your suite connects to the nursery," Mrs. Vasquez said from the doorway. "Would you like to see it now?" I nodded, reluctant to leave Noah but desperate for a moment alone to gather my thoughts. The blue suite, as she called it, was equally impressive. A spacious bedroom with a king-sized four-poster bed, an ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub, and a small sitting area by a window overlooking the forest. "Your things will be delivered tomorrow," Antonio said, following us into the room. In the meantime, Mrs. Vasquez has provided essentials in the dresser and bathroom. My things. I turned to face him. How? As I said, your apartment has been emptied. His tone was matter of fact, as if discussing the weather rather than the systematic dismantling of my life. Everything has been transported here. Books, clothes, photographs, even that ridiculous stuffed penguin you keep on your bed, the casual mention of Mr. Waddles, a childhood toy I'd never been able to part with, made my blood run cold. He hadn't just tracked us down, he'd been watching me, studying me. Long before I fled. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Antonio dismissed Mrs. Vasquez with a nod before answering. When the door closed behind her, he stepped closer, into my personal space, forcing me to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. Because you're mine, Emma. You and Noah. You became mine the moment you carried my child. His voice was soft but implacable. I protect what's mine. I provide for what's mine, and I don't let anyone take what's mine. I'm not a possession. Aren't you? His hand came up to cup my cheek, the touch deceptively gentle. Everything has a price, Emma. Everyone can be owned. The only question is who holds the deed. I pulled away, anger flaring through my exhaustion. Is that why you pursued me? To own me? His laugh was low, almost intimate. I pursued you because you fascinated me. A nurse who stood up to me when I tried to bully information about my associate from her. Beautiful, stubborn, compassionate. You saw past my wealth and power to the man beneath, or so I thought. I didn't know who you really were, didn't you? His eyes narrowed. On some level, you must have sensed it. The danger, the power. It's what attracted you to me, whether you admit it or not. I turned away from Antonio, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze or the uncomfortable truth in his words. Had I sensed something dangerous about him from the beginning? Had that been part of his appeal? You should rest, he said, his tone softening. It's been a long night, and Noah will be awake again soon. Will you lock me in? I asked bitterly, still facing the window. That won't be necessary. The confidence in his voice was more effective than any lock. There's nowhere to go, Emma. We're miles from the nearest town and my men patrol the grounds. Besides, he moved closer, his breath warm against my ear. You won't leave without Noah, and Noah isn't going anywhere. His certainty terrified me because he was right. I couldn't leave without my son. Get some sleep, Antonio continued, stepping back. We'll talk more when you're rested. The door closed softly behind him. I remained still, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway, before collapsing onto the edge of the bed. Tears I'd been holding back spilled freely now. Hot and bitter, I buried my face in my hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. How had my life come to this? Trapped in a remote mansion with a man who believed he owned me, who had systematically dismantled my life in Boston, who spoke of protection and provision while threatening me in the same breath. Exhaustion eventually overwhelmed my despair. I checked on Noah one last time, still sleeping peacefully in his luxurious new crib, before returning to my room. I didn't bother changing out of my clothes, simply kicking off my shoes before crawling under the plush duvet. Despite my determination to stay alert, to plan some means of escape, sleep claimed me almost instantly. I woke to sunlight streaming through the windows, and the sound of Noah's babbling through the nursery door. Disoriented, I sat up, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar surroundings before the previous night's events came rushing back. Antonio, the SUV, the long drive north. I hurried to the connecting door, pushing it open to find Mrs. Vasquez changing Noah's diaper while speaking to him in soft Spanish. She looked up at my entrance, her expression neutral. Good morning, Ms. Pierce. I hope you slept well. Where's Antonio? I asked, moving to Noah's side. He smiled up at me, kicking his legs in recognition, and some of the tension eased from my shoulders. Mr. Russo had business to attend to. He left shortly after sunrise but said he would return this evening. Mrs. Vasquez efficiently fastened Noah's clean diaper. There's breakfast waiting downstairs when you're ready. Mr. Russo asked that I show you the grounds afterward. Show me my prison, I thought bitterly, but nodded. I'll feed Noah first. Of course. She stepped back, allowing me to lift Noah into my arms. The kitchen is fully stocked with his formula and baby food. Everything has been prepared according to the schedule you established. My skin crawled at the reminder of how thoroughly Antonio had studied our routines. Thank you, I managed, forcing politeness. It wasn't Mrs. Vasquez's fault that her employer was a controlling criminal. After feeding Noah and finding clothes for both of us in the dressers, everything new, everything my size, everything my style, we ventured downstairs. Mrs. Vasquez led us to a sunny breakfast nook where fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee awaited. Mr. Russo mentioned you prefer a light breakfast, she said, pouring coffee into a delicate china cup, but the chef can prepare anything you wish. This is fine, I said, settling Noah into a high chair that hadn't been there the night before. Everything prepared, everything anticipated. It was as impressive as it was disturbing. After breakfast, Mrs. Vasquez gave us a tour of the mansion, or at least the parts we were permitted to access, as she tactfully phrased it. The house was even larger than it had appeared, with multiple living areas, a formal dining room, a library filled with leather-bound books, and a sunroom overlooking a manicured garden. The east wing is Mr. Russo's private quarters, Mrs. Vasquez explained as we passed a closed door. He asks that you respect his privacy. As if I had any desire to venture into the lion's den. The grounds were equally impressive. Gardens gave way to manicured lawns, which in turn melted into the surrounding forest. A stone path led to a small lake, its surface glittering in the morning sun. It was beautiful, peaceful, and utterly isolated. As we walked back toward the house, I spotted two men in dark clothing at the edge of the property, their posture alert, their attention fixed on us. Security, Mrs. Vasquez said, following my gaze. They're here for your protection. Is that what Antonio told them? I asked before I could stop myself. Mrs. Vasquez's expression remained impassive. Mr. Russo has enemies, Ms. Pierce. The security is necessary. I said nothing more, but as we continued our tour, I noted the positions of the security cameras mounted discreetly around the property, the patterns of the guards' movements, the carefully controlled access points. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress, and I was its newest prisoner. The day passed slowly. I spent most of it in the nursery or garden with Noah, trying to maintain our normal routine despite the extraordinary circumstances. Mrs. Vasquez kept a respectful distance, but was always nearby, ready to provide anything we needed. By late afternoon, Noah was cranky from the disruption to his schedule. I paced the nursery with him, singing softly, trying to soothe him to sleep. The sound of tires on gravel drifted through the open window, Antonio returning, I assumed. Sure enough, less than 10 minutes later, a soft knock came at the nursery door. Antonio entered without waiting for a response, his suit replaced by dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look even more imposing. "How is he?" he asked, moving to stand beside us. "Overtired," I replied, continuing to pace. "It's been a long day for him, for both of you." Antonio's eyes assessed me with that penetrating gaze. "Mrs. Vasquez says you barely ate lunch." I wasn't hungry. "You need to take care of yourself, Emma." His tone held a note of warning. "I won't have you neglecting your health." "I'm fine," I insisted, turning away to place Noah, finally drifting off into his crib. Antonio watched me, his expression unreadable. When Noah was settled, he gestured toward the door. "Join me for dinner." It wasn't a request. I followed him downstairs to the formal dining room, where the table had been set for two with fine china and crystal. A bottle of red wine was already open, breathing beside Antonio's place setting. "Sit," he said, pulling out a chair for me. The meal was brought out by a man I hadn't seen before. A chef, I presumed, given his attire. Each course was exquisitely prepared, the presentation worthy of a fine restaurant. I ate mechanically, barely tasting the food despite its obvious quality. Antonio watched me throughout the meal, making occasional comments about the house, the surrounding area, asking if Noah had everything he needed. The banality of the conversation was surreal given our circumstances. "Why am I here?" I finally asked as dessert was served, a delicate chocolate soufflé that would have delighted me under different circumstances. Antonio took a sip of wine before answering. "I told you. You and Noah belong with me, but why?" I pressed, You disappeared when I told you I was pregnant. You clearly didn't want a family then." His expression darkened. "I had complications to attend to, rivals who would have seen my child as a weakness to exploit. Your pregnancy came at an inopportune time. So you abandoned us. I protected you by keeping my distance," he corrected, his voice hardening. "I had arrangements in place to monitor your welfare, financial provisions set aside for the child. I never received a dime from you. Because you never asked." His smile was cold. "Your pride wouldn't allow it, but the money was there, waiting. Just as I was waiting for the right moment to bring you into my life properly. And now is that moment?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "Now that you've had me hunted down like an animal? Now that certain obstacles have been removed?" Antonio leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "My enemies have been dealt with. My position is secure. It's time for my son to take his rightful place in my life, in my family." "As what? Your heir? The next generation of criminal?" His hand shot out, gripping my wrist with painful intensity. "Watch your tongue, Emma. There are limits to my patience." Fear flashed through me, but I refused to show it. The truth hurts, doesn't it? You can dress it up in expensive suits and talk about business, but we both know what you really are. For a moment, I thought he might strike me. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed his face, reminding me painfully of the man I'd thought I knew in Boston. "There she is," he said, his grip on my wrist gentling but not releasing. "The fiery nurse who caught my attention. I was beginning to think I'd broken your spirit." "You haven't broken anything," I retorted, pulling my hand free. "Good." He sat back, reaching for his wine glass. "I have no interest in a broken woman raising my son. I want you as you are, Emma. Strong, stubborn, principled. Then let us go." "Never." The word was soft but absolute. "You and Noah are mine now. The sooner you accept that, the happier we'll all be." "I'll never be happy as your prisoner," Antonio sighed, setting down his glass. "You're not a prisoner, Emma. You're the mother of my child, the woman who will stand beside me as I build a legacy for our son. I don't want any part of your legacy. Yet you're already central to it." His expression softened marginally. "Noah is my blood, my future. And you, Emma, you gave me that future. How could I not value you for that gift alone?" The sincerity in his voice was more unsettling than his threats had been. In Antonio's twisted worldview, he truly believed he was honoring me by bringing me into his life, by claiming me and Noah as possessions. "I want to check on Noah," I said, needing to escape the intensity of his gaze. Antonio nodded, surprisingly acquiescent. "Of course. But this conversation isn't finished, Emma. Sooner or later you'll have to accept your place here, your place with me." I rose without responding, fleeing the oppressive atmosphere of the dining room for the relative sanctuary of the nursery. Noah slept peacefully, unaware of the power struggle being waged over his future as I watched my son's chest rise and fall. I made a silent promise. Somehow, some way, I would find a way to free us from Antonio's grasp. I had to, for Noah's sake, because I refused to let my son grow up to become like his father. Days melted into weeks with a routine that was both comforting and maddening in its predictability. Each morning, I woke to Noah's babbling. We'd have breakfast in the sunny nook, then spend our mornings in the gardens or by the lake if the weather permitted. Afternoons were for naps and quiet play in the nursery. Evenings brought Antonio's return from whatever mysterious business occupied his days. He insisted we dine together every night, Noah in a high chair between us like some parody of a normal family. After dinner, Antonio would spend time with Noah, watching with possessive pride as our son grew more active, more aware. I was always present during these interactions, hovering protectively, though Antonio never gave me reason to fear for Noah's physical safety. It was his soul I feared for, the influence Antonio's presence would have on my innocent child. 3 weeks into our captivity, for despite the luxury surrounding us, that's what it was, I began to notice subtle changes in Antonio's behavior. He lingered longer at dinner, asking questions about my day, sharing carefully edited stories from his childhood. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't looking, I caught him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't just possession in his eyes anymore. There was something else, something that made my heart race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The 4th week brought rain, confining us to the house. By the 3rd day of downpours, I was desperate for distraction. After putting Noah down for his afternoon nap, I wandered to the library, hoping to lose myself in a book. I was surprised to find Antonio there, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, focused on papers spread across an antique desk. "Sorry," I said, turning to leave. "I didn't know you were home." "Stay," he said, looking up. Something in his expression, a weariness I hadn't seen before, made me pause. "Please," he added, the word awkward on his lips, as if he rarely used it. Hesitantly, I moved to the bookshelves, scanning titles while acutely aware of his presence behind me. "You can take any book you like," he said, his voice softer than usual. "They're not just for show." I selected a novel at random, then turned to face him. "Why aren't you at wherever you go during the day?" A slight smile curved his lips. "Careful, Emma." That almost sounded like interest in my activities. "Just curious why you're disrupting the routine." "The rain." He gestured toward the windows where water streamed down the glass. "Makes certain meetings difficult." I moved to a chair by the fireplace, opening my book without really seeing the words. After a moment, Antonio returned to his papers, the scratch of his pen the only sound beyond the rain and crackling fire. The silence should have been tense, uncomfortable. Instead, it felt almost peaceful. I found myself watching him over the edge of my book, studying the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the strong line of his jaw, the confident movements of his hands. "You're staring," he observed without looking up. "I'm trying to understand you," I admitted. Now he did look up, dark eyes meeting mine across the room. "What is there to understand? How you can be two people at once? The man who kidnapped me and my son, who threatens and controls us, and the man who reads to Noah with such gentleness, who asks about my day as if he actually cares." Antonio set down his pen, leaning back in his chair. "They're not different men, Emma, just different sides of the same one." "The criminal and the father?" I expected anger at the provocation, but he merely shrugged. "If those are the labels you prefer, what labels would you use? Protector? Provider?" His eyes held mine. "Man." The simplicity of the answer struck me speechless. Antonio used the moment to rise from his desk and cross to the drinks cabinet, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers. "Here," he said, offering me one. "I don't want—" "It's just scotch, Emma, not poison." A hint of amusement colored his voice. "Though I understand why you might confuse the two when it comes from my hand." I accepted the glass but didn't drink, watching as he settled into the chair opposite mine. The firelight played across his features, softening the hard angles of his face. "Why me?" I asked suddenly. "Of all the women you could have claimed, why choose a nurse with no connections, no money, nothing to offer your business?" Antonio studied his scotch, turning the glass to catch the light. "Perhaps that's precisely why. You wanted nothing from me but myself. I didn't know who yourself really was. Didn't you?" His gaze lifted to mine. "I never lied about who I was, Emma. You chose not to see certain aspects of my life, but they were always there, just beneath the surface." There was truth in his words that I didn't want to acknowledge. I had ignored the warning signs, the mysterious business associates, the way people deferred to him in restaurants, the vague explanations about his work. "You fascinated me," Antonio continued, his voice thoughtful. "So different from the women in my world. Strong, independent, compassionate." He took a sip of his scotch, "and beautiful, though you've never seemed aware of it." Heat rose to my cheeks, unwelcome but undeniable. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't what? Speak the truth?" He leaned forward, elbows on knees, his intense gaze holding mine. "You can hate what I am, Emma. You can hate what I've done. But don't lie to yourself about what exists between us. Stockholm Syndrome?" He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Always so quick with that sharp tongue. "No, not Stockholm Syndrome. This predates your involuntary stay here." I finally took a sip of the scotch, welcoming its burn. There is no us, Antonio. There's you, imposing your will, and me, with no choice but to endure it. Is that really how you see our situation? No choice but to endure? He set his glass down with deliberate care. You have choices, Emma. You've always had choices. Like what? Leaving my son behind? Running into the wilderness with no money, no phone, no way to escape your men? Anger rose in my throat. Those aren't choices. They're impossible scenarios you've engineered to trap me here. Antonio's expression darkened. I brought you here because you took my son and ran. Because you denied me my right as his father. You forfeited that right when you disappeared. I explained why. You explained nothing. The emotions I'd been suppressing for weeks burst forth. You gave me some vague excuse about complications and rivals. But the truth is, you didn't want the responsibility. You didn't want us until you realized someone else might have us. Until your possessive nature couldn't bear the thought of losing what you considered yours. I expected rage. Instead, Antonio went very still, his eyes never leaving mine. You think I didn't want you? That I stayed away by choice? He laughed bitterly. I had Salvatore Moretti's men hunting for me, Emma, the same man who'd already killed my brother for encroaching on his territory. If he'd learned about you, about Noah, you'd both be dead. The raw pain in his voice silenced me. I kept my distance to keep you safe, he continued, his voice low and intense. I had men watching your apartment, your hospital. I knew every step you took, every person you spoke to. I transferred money into accounts in your name that you never touched, because your damnable pride wouldn't let you look for them. I didn't know. No, you didn't. Antonio rose abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the rain. And when Moretti was finally dealt with, when I could finally claim you and my son without painting targets on your backs, what did I find? That you'd disappeared. That you'd taken my child and run. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the rain against the windows and the crackling of the fire. I struggled to reconcile this version of events with what I'd believed for so long. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked finally. He turned, his profile silhouetted against the gray light. Would you have believed me, or would you have seen it as another manipulation, another lie from the criminal you despise? The baby monitor on the table beside me crackled with Noah's whimpering. He was waking from his nap. I rose, grateful for the interruption. Noah needs me, I said, setting down my barely touched scotch. Antonio nodded, his expression unreadable. We'll continue this conversation another time, Emma. There's more you need to understand. I fled the library, my thoughts in turmoil. Could Antonio be telling the truth? Had he really stayed away to protect us, or was this just another manipulation, designed to earn my sympathy, my compliance? Noah's fussing escalated to full cries by the time I reached the nursery. I lifted him from the crib, inhaling his sweet baby scent as I held him close. It's okay, sweet boy, I murmured, swaying gently. Mommy's here. As I changed his diaper and prepared a bottle, my mind raced. If Antonio had been telling the truth, if he had stayed away to protect us from this Moretti person, then my flight with Noah must have seemed like the ultimate betrayal. No wonder he'd been so determined to find us, so possessive once he had. But that didn't excuse keeping us here against our will, I reminded myself. Understanding his motives didn't justify his actions. Noah settled in my arms, his little hand resting against the bottle as he drank. His eyes, Antonio's eyes, gazed up at me with complete trust. In that moment, the weight of my responsibility to him felt crushing. What was the right path forward? To continue resisting Antonio, maintaining the hostility between us, or to find some way to coexist, to create a semblance of stability for Noah's sake? That evening, Antonio didn't return for dinner. Mrs. Vasquez informed me he had been called away on urgent business and wasn't expected back until the following day. I felt an unexpected twinge of something at his absence. Not disappointment, surely. Relief, perhaps. Or concern about what urgent business might entail for a man in his position. I ate alone in the breakfast nook rather than the formal dining room, Noah babbling happily in his high chair beside me. After putting him to bed, I returned to the library, drawn by some impulse I couldn't quite name. Antonio's papers were gone from the desk, the surface now bare except for a small leather-bound book. Curious, I picked it up. A journal, its pages filled with neat, masculine handwriting. The first entry was dated shortly after I'd told Antonio I was pregnant. I knew I should put it down, that reading it was an invasion of privacy. But the glimpse of my name on the page compelled me to continue. Emma is pregnant. My child grows inside her. The timing couldn't be worse with Moretti closing in, but I find myself affected by the news in ways I hadn't anticipated. I've arranged for additional security on her apartment, her workplace. She doesn't know, of course, wouldn't accept it if she did. That independence, that fire, is what drew me to her in the first place. I turned the page, heart racing. Had to leave Boston today. Moretti's men were seen near the hospital. Too close to Emma. Can't risk their discovering her connection to me. Carlo will maintain surveillance. Monthly reports only, to minimize any trail leading back to her. The distance is difficult. More so than I expected. I sank into a chair, continuing to read as Antonio chronicled the months of my pregnancy and Noah's early life, all from a distance, through the reports of his men. The entries were sparse, factual. Yet between the lines I sensed a longing, a frustration that matched my own during those months when I believed he had simply abandoned us. The final entry was dated just before he had appeared at my apartment door. Moretti is dead. His organization dismantled. The threat is eliminated. Tomorrow I claim what's mine, my son, Emma. They will finally take their rightful place in my life, my family. Nothing will separate us again. I closed the journal, my hands trembling. If these entries were genuine, and the raw emotion in them suggested they were, then Antonio had never abandoned us. He had been watching, waiting, protecting us from afar. It changed everything, and nothing. Because regardless of his reasons, he had still taken us by force, still kept us here against our will, still viewed us as possessions rather than people with our own choices, our own lives, didn't he? I replaced the journal exactly where I'd found it, and left the library, my mind churning with conflicting emotions. Sleep eluded me that night. I kept replaying Antonio's words, the pain in his voice when he spoke of staying away to protect us, the possessive certainty in his journal entry. Tomorrow I claim what's mine. By morning, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but clarity remained frustratingly out of reach. I went through the motions of our daily routine. Breakfast with Noah, morning playtime, lunch, all while wrestling with the implications of what I'd learned. Antonio returned shortly after noon, earlier than expected. I was in the garden with Noah, watching as he crawled energetically across a blanket I'd spread on the grass, when the sound of tires on gravel announced his arrival. Minutes later, he appeared on the garden path, still in his suit but with tie loosened, jacket slung over one shoulder. "You're back early," I said, unable to read his expression as he approached. The matter was resolved more quickly than anticipated. His eyes moved to Noah, softening as our son pulled himself up on unsteady legs, using my arm for balance. "He's getting stronger. He's trying to walk. Won't be long now." Antonio set his jacket aside and lowered himself to the blanket, his movements graceful despite the formality of his attire. Noah immediately abandoned my arm in favor of his father's, babbling excitedly as he gripped Antonio's outstretched hands. "That's it, Piccolo Leone," Antonio encouraged, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it. "You're almost there. Little lion." The endearment made my heart twist unexpectedly. Noah took one wobbly step, then another, his face a picture of concentration. When he finally collapsed into Antonio's waiting arms, his delighted giggle was matched by Antonio's deep laugh. "Did you see that?" Antonio looked up at me, genuine joy lighting his features. He nearly had it. I saw. I couldn't help but smile at Noah's achievement, even as I noted the strange intimacy of sharing this moment with Antonio, like actual parents, not captor and captive. "He has your determination," Antonio said, settling Noah on his lap. "Stubborn, just like his mother. Let's hope that's all he inherits from me." Antonio's expression sobered. "There are worse qualities he could inherit than your compassion, your integrity, or your ruthlessness, your belief that people are possessions to be owned." I regretted the words as soon as they left my mouth, expecting anger. Instead, Antonio sighed, a weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of our entire complicated situation. "We need to talk, Emma, properly, without interruptions." He glanced at his watch. "Tonight, after Noah is asleep, there are things you need to understand about me, about my world." I hesitated, then nodded. "All right." The rest of the day passed in a strange limbo, both of us carefully polite as we moved through our routines. Dinner was a quiet affair, the tension between us palpable, but somehow different than before, charged with anticipation rather than hostility. After Noah was settled for the night, I found Antonio in the library again, this time with a fire blazing despite the mild evening. 2 glasses of scotch waited on the small table between the leather chairs. "Sit, please," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his. I sat, accepting the scotch he offered more from a need for something to hold than any desire for alcohol. "I read your journal," I confessed abruptly, needing to clear the air. "Yesterday, when you were gone. It was on the desk and I know." Antonio's expression remained neutral. "I left it there for you to find." "You... what?" A slight smile curved his lips. "There are some things I find difficult to express directly, Emma. The journal offered a perspective I thought you should have. So it was all true? About Moretti? About staying away to protect us?" "Every word." Antonio took a sip of his scotch, his dark eyes never leaving mine. "I don't lie, Emma. I may withhold information when necessary, but I don't lie. Especially not to you." "Why, especially me?" "Because you see through it. You always have." His voice softened. "It's one of the reasons I was drawn to you from the beginning. Your ability to see past pretense, to the truth beneath." I looked down at my glass, uncomfortable with the sincerity in his expression. "If that's true, then why didn't I see who you really were when we met? Perhaps because I never hid it, not really." Antonio leaned forward, elbows on knees. "You knew I was dangerous, Emma. You sensed the power, the darkness. You were drawn to it even as part of you feared it." There was uncomfortable truth in his words. I had been attracted to his intensity, his commanding presence, the sense that he lived by his own rules. "That doesn't mean I accepted what you are," I said finally. "What you do. And what is it you think I do, exactly?" He raised an eyebrow. "You throw around words like criminal and mafia boss, but have you ever asked yourself what those labels actually mean in my world?" "I know enough. Drugs, gambling, extortion." "Business," Antonio interrupted. "Territory, protection. You see only the surface, Emma, the way the law defines these things. Black and white, legal and illegal. But the world isn't so simple. Hurting people is wrong. That's pretty simple." "Is it?" He set his glass down. "The man who embezzles millions, destroys pensions, ruins lives, but does it all within the law, is he better than the man who breaks legs to protect his territory? The politician who takes bribes to allow corporations to poison neighborhoods, is he better than the criminal who enforces his own justice when the law fails? That's a false equivalence, is it?" Antonio's expression hardened. "My father was a fisherman in Sicily. Honest work, breaking his back every day to feed his family. When a storm destroyed his boat, he went to the bank for a loan. They refused. No collateral, they said, so he went to Don Castellano instead." I remained silent, sensing this story was important. The Don gave him the money. No papers, no interest, just a handshake, and the understanding that my father would remember the favor. Antonio's eyes grew distant with memory. "When I was 10, men came to our village. Not local men, Americans with connections to the government, with plans to build a resort that would destroy the fishing grounds. The mayor was paid to look the other way. The police were paid to ignore complaints. What happened? The dawn happened." A cold smile touched Antonio's lips. 3 men left the village in body bags. The resort was never built. The fishing grounds remained untouched. Was that criminal? By the law, yes. By the standards of our community, it was justice when no one else would provide it. I struggled to formulate a response that didn't sound naive or judgmental. that doesn't justify everything you do. No, it doesn't. Antonio surprised me with his agreement. There are aspects of my business that even I find distasteful. Necessary, but distasteful. Then why continue? Because someone will always fill the void, Emma. Better me, with my code, my limits, than someone without them. He reached for his scotch again, and because it's what I know, what I was raised to be. And Noah? Is that what you want for him too? The question hung in the air between us. Antonio took his time answering, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. What I want for Noah is choice, he said finally. The choice I never had. I want him educated, cultured, prepared to take over my legitimate businesses if he wishes, or to forge his own path entirely. Legitimate businesses? Antonio's smile was wry. You think all my income comes from illegal activities? I own real estate throughout the Northeast. Construction companies, import, export firms, all perfectly legal, all profitable. Then why risk the rest, if you have legitimate options? Because power doesn't come from writing rental agreements, Emma. Protection, true protection, comes from being feared. His voice hardened. And my family will always be protected. The intensity in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. For all his talk of codes and limits, Antonio was still a dangerous man. A man who had killed, who had ordered others killed, who lived by his own brutal version of justice. I can't accept that, I said softly. I can't raise Noah in this world, Antonio. I can't pretend that what you do is just another business, another lifestyle choice. I'm not asking you to. He set his glass down and leaned forward, his expression more earnest than I'd ever seen it. I'm asking you to see the whole of me, Emma. The man who would kill to protect his family, and the man who reads bedtime stories to his son. The man who breaks the law, and the man who holds himself to a higher standard than any legal code. And if I can't, if I can never accept those parts of you, then we'll reach an accommodation. His tone was matter-of-fact. I won't force you to love me, Emma. But Noah is my son, and you are his mother. We're bound together by him, whether you accept me or not, so we remain your prisoners. Antonio sighed, rubbing a hand over his face, a rare gesture of frustration. Is that truly how you see yourself? As a prisoner? What would you call someone kept against their will? And if the gates were open, his eyes locked with mine, if I told you that you could leave tomorrow, walk away, what would you do? The question caught me off guard. I'd take Noah and go. Where? His voice was gentle but persistent. Back to Boston, where your job has been filled. To your apartment, which no longer exists. To your bank accounts, which are empty because you withdrew everything before running. To your friends, who believe you've moved away for family reasons. Each question was a blow, systematically dismantling the life I'd imagined returning to. I'd find somewhere new, I insisted. Start over. Alone? With no support, no resources, constantly looking over your shoulder for my men, or worse, my enemies who might use you and Noah to get to me. Antonio shook his head. That's not freedom, Emma. That's just a different kind of prison. I stood abruptly, unable to bear the logic of his arguments. I need some air. To my surprise, Antonio didn't try to stop me. The terrace is pleasant this time of night. I left the library without responding, making my way through the silent house to the stone terrace that overlooked the garden. The night air was cool, scented with pine and earth. Stars glittered overhead, more than I'd ever seen in Boston. Leaning against the stone balustrade, I tried to sort through my tumultuous thoughts. Antonio had dismantled every scenario in which I could escape with Noah. He'd destroyed my old life, ensuring I had nowhere to return to, no support system to fall back on. Yet he claimed he would let me leave if I chose to. Was it another manipulation, or was he genuinely offering a choice, confident that I would reach the same conclusion he had, that staying was the only viable option? I heard his footsteps behind me but didn't turn. He came to stand beside me, leaving a respectful distance between us as he gazed up at the stars. I'm not a good man by conventional standards, Emma, he said quietly. I've done things that would horrify you. I'll likely do them again if circumstances require it. Why are you telling me this? Because I want your eyes open if you choose to stay. He turned to face me, his expression serious. No illusions, no false hopes about changing me or my world. And if I choose to go, then I'll provide for you and Noah a new identity, a house somewhere safe, money. His voice tightened. And I'll visit my son regularly, watch him grow, be part of his life in whatever capacity you'll allow. The offer stunned me. It was more than I'd dared hope for, yet less than what some part of me, a part I'd been denying, wanted. Why? I whispered. Why would you let us go after everything you've done to keep us here? Antonio was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost vulnerable. Because keeping you against your will is destroying what I most value in you. He turned to face me fully. Your spirit. Your fire. The woman who stood up to me that first day in the hospital. His hand came up slowly, giving me time to pull away. When I didn't, his fingers brushed my cheek with surprising gentleness. I want you by my side, Emma, not as a prisoner, but as a partner. Noah's mother. He hesitated, as if the word was foreign to him, my equal. The touch, the words, the unexpected vulnerability in his expression, all of it combined to create a moment of clarity I hadn't expected. Antonio was offering me a choice, a real choice, perhaps for the first time since he'd reappeared in my life, and in that moment, I realized my own truth. That despite everything, some part of me had never stopped being drawn to him, to his strength, his intensity, his absolute devotion to those he considered his. I need time, I said finally, to think, to decide. Antonio nodded, his hand dropping away from my face. Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere. As he turned to leave, I found myself reaching for his arm. Antonio. He paused, looking back at me. Thank you. For the truth. For the choice. Something like hope flickered in his dark eyes. Always, Emma. For you. Always.